How much does it cost to turbo a car? That's a question that I see all the time on Facebook groups and YouTube videos and forum posts, and there's always a super wide range of answers that people will give you. You'll get the people out there that are like, if you don't spend $10,000, you're not going to be able to turbo your car, or it's going to be garbage and you're just not going to have a good time. And then you get people that are like, I have $200. Is that going to be enough to reliably turbo my car? In this video, we're going to be going over my turbo build costs on this Miata, and I'm going to be showing you how much it will actually cost to turbo your car. If you go a pretty DIY style route, I'll show you good options and bad options, and I'll also talk about turbo kits a little bit and what you could expect price-wise for things like that. Without further ado, let's get into this video and tell you how much it costs to turbo a car. So to start out, I want to talk about turbo kits. Now, turbo kits are generally a good option if you don't have a lot of DIY experience and if you want to get all of the pieces that you'll need to slap them onto your car and get them up and running. Usually, because of the convenience and the put-togetherness of good kits, you're going to be paying a ton of money. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the prices of complete kits, but I can tell you that for a name brand turbo kit for my car, it would have cost me 4 to 6 times the cost of what I spent to reliably turbo this car. I will say that the way I turboed my car is the right way to turbo a car, with a standalone ECU and an intercooler and good engine management to really take care of what the car is doing. That's the most important thing when you're turboing a car. If the ECU, which is the brains of your car, isn't ready for boost, you're going to be blowing up your car right away, and it won't matter how much you spent on that turbo build because it's not going to last. And now with that brief overview of turbo kits, let's take a look at my build here, and I'm going to go start to finish with all the components that you need to turbo a car with a price. The first thing that you'll need to properly turbo your car is an ECU. Once again, this is the brains of the car that will control the engine, give it enough fuel, control your ignition timing, and basically allow you to tune it so you don't blow it up. On my car, that was $375, and this was the most expensive component of my turbo build. I went with the Speedy EFI ECU, which is on the lower end price-wise, but performance-wise, it's actually a pretty mid-grade ECU, and it is very tunable, and it's perfect for beginners for their first turbo build. They make plug-and-play kits for cars like this Miata, but if you don't have a Miata, they make a kit that you could wire in yourself, which is actually a little bit less than the complete plug-and-play kit. Like I said, I spent $375 on this ECU. They come up pretty regularly as complete kits for $275. A minimalistic alternative would be building your own board. Yes, you could wire up your own ECU and run your car with it. And a bad alternative is what a lot of people like to try to do, and that is trick a stock ECU into running boost. Now, on some cars, you're able to retune your ECUs and get them ready for boost. On cars like this Miata, you can't really do that, and it's really a band-aid fix that you could get to work, but it's not going to work great unless you spend a lot of money on those band-aids, and at that point, you might as well just get a proper engine management system for your car. Next on the list, that's part of your engine management system, we have that nice little thing that's coming off of my downpipe there, and that is a wideband O2 sensor, and in my car I also have a wideband gauge. This is what's going to tell you what the air-fuel ratio is going through your engine, and this is critical information that you'll need to properly tune your car and not blow it up. Once again, this is something that I would not cheap out on. I went with a AEM Electronics air-fuel gauge and sensor there, and this is a really good top-of-the-line kit. This is something that you'll want to spend money on. It's crucial that you do this. My wideband, the AEM 30 series, was $163. I've seen them come up used for as cheap as $80. And if you're going to do it the hacked way, you don't need this, but once again, I highly would recommend it. Also, I have my complete build spreadsheet linked down in the description below. This will be a great starting point with links for you to start picking out parts to do a cheap DIY style turbo build. And now, congratulations, you have the engine management in your car that you need to properly run it. If you're going to run a lot of boost, you might need bigger fuel injectors, which will allow you to get more fuel to your engine. You could often get used fuel injectors out of other cars that will plug right into your car for not a lot of money. On my car, I spent $65 on some RX-8 injectors. A lot of the time, these things get a pretty bad rep, but that's because a lot of times people get cheap eBay knockoffs, and these are genuine injectors in my car, and they seem to be pretty decent. Once again, it depends on the car what you'll need, but I spent a solid $65 on this. If you were to get a cheaper used alternative, I've seen these for as low as $40 to $45. And a minimalistic approach or a bad alternative would be not updating your fuel injectors. If you're not running a lot of boost, you might not need to, but if you plan on really pushing your engine, it's likely that you'll run out of fuel on stock injectors. And now let's talk about our turbo and manifold, since that's the nice shiny piece of hardware that everybody wants to buy first. Now, I would highly recommend doing your engine management stuff first, but if you do want to go ahead and just pick out a turbo and manifold, because that is the more fun part of the build for most people, you want to try to get a nice cast iron manifold or a manifold that's been proven to last a long time and not crack. A lot of the time on cheaper tubular manifolds, the welds are bad, the gauge thickness is thin on the steel, and they don't last a long time. So look for a cast manifold if you could get one. They might not flow quite as good depending on the car and the manifold type, but cast will be more durable, and generally you could get inexpensive cast manifolds. On my car, I picked that manifold up for $90. Since I did this about a year ago, the prices have pretty much doubled, and they're right up around $200, but it's still fairly inexpensive. Yes, there are name brand manifolds that will flow better. Yes, you could spend a lot more money than that on a manifold, but if you're just looking to reliably turbo your car, you don't need the absolute best flow and best performance, and you could get away with a relatively inexpensive manifold. And next up, we have the turbo. So on my car, I went with an inexpensive eBay turbo that I spent $180 on. Now, opposite the manifold, since I bought that thing for $180, those prices have came down to right around $100 and maybe just a little bit more, but not $180. eBay turbos have actually been generally proven to be fairly good and last a decently long time. The problem that you might run into going with eBay stuff is there's not a lot of technical data on those turbos. They'll normally give a horsepower range, which is sort of just a made-up estimate that they give. They don't give like a nice compressor map or anything like that. That will show you how the turbos will actually perform, so it's a bit of a crapshoot. With that said, look at name brand turbos and compare the specs of that to an eBay turbo, and you'll have a rough idea of how one of these turbos will perform. The other option, if you want to spend a little bit more money, is buying a name brand turbo that's going to bolt right onto your manifold. It's important that your turbo and your manifold match, and a name brand turbo will generally give you better reliability and better performance, but like I said, you normally need to spend a little bit more. For me, this eBay turbo has been doing the job great, and after a lot of hard driving so far, I haven't had problems with it, but we'll see how that lasts much longer term. I don't expect anything major to go wrong, and if it does, they're very inexpensive to replace. Once again, I spent $180 on my turbo and $90 on a manifold. You definitely could spend more in the $100 range or less if you get a cheaper eBay turbo. And you also could get manifolds maybe a little bit cheaper, but I would budget around $100 to $200 for a manifold and $100 to $200 for a turbo if you're going with cheaper stuff like this. If you're looking at more expensive stuff, the sky's really the limit, because there's always going to be a better turbo, there's always going to be a better manifold. You just have to decide what you want to spend and what's worth it to you to get your car all up and turboed. So now you have your turbo and your engine management, and you're ready to bolt the stuff on and go. But you're not really yet, because there's still a lot more that you're going to need. The first thing that you're going to need once you have all of that stuff together is oil lines to feed your turbo. These are generally around $30 for a universal kit that you'll need to set up yourself, plus a few fittings, so I would budget around $30 to $50 to $60, I would say, for these oil lines. Once again, these aren't extremely top-of-the-line lines, but they do the trick for that price, and you'll be in pretty good shape if you budget that. Running your oil lines is generally a pretty big, semi-scary job, because you do have to drill into your oil pan for your oil return, but I do have videos on literally everything that I'm talking about in this video on my channel, so check that out if you're interested in learning how to turbo your car a very DIY and inexpensive style. Great, now we have our turbo, our manifold, our engine management. The turbo's got oil to it. Sometimes it also will need coolant lines, but for the purposes of this video, I'm not including that. Once again, I would estimate around $30 to $60 to run coolant lines. But anyway, mine's not liquid cooled, mine's just oil cooled, so I skipped that. And now we need to get the air coming out of the turbo into our engine. And with that, you need to buy a bunch of couplers and piping. And if you're interested, and you should be interested, you need to buy an intercooler. Now, what that will do is reduce your intake air temperatures to allow you to run more timing and make more power. You don't need to run an intercooler, but I would highly recommend it because it allows you to run more timing, which means you'll be able to make more power and you'll be able to have more fun at the end of the day with your turbocharged car if it's intercooled. These couplers you could generally find on eBay for a couple bucks each. This tubing I bought at Summit Racing for I think about $20, and the intercooler I spent $90 on. Now, often you could find intercooler kits that will come with a lot of piping and couplers in the intercooler, and you could sort of piece it together that way. I've seen those as cheap as like 60 bucks, but the prices range a lot. And for my entire setup, I probably spent around $150 to get this intercooler all set up. Now, looking at this sheet again, a used alternative, you could pick intercoolers up for $50 on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. A minimalistic and a bad alternative would be not running an intercooler at all. Once again, you could do it, but I wouldn't recommend it because it'll make it so you can't really reliably run as much boost because you're going to get really hot intake temperatures. And now for some fun stuff that all the racer boosty boys really love: blow-off valves. Now, this is something that's not really necessary if you're running lower levels of boost, but it's something that I wanted because it sounds cool and ultimately it does protect from compressor surge when you let off throttle. There's lots of debates out there over whether or not those things are worth it and if you need them, but for my purposes, I wanted it. If you don't want to run one, you'll get the nice woo, poo, 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 poo sounds when you let off throttle, but for me, I really like the blow-off valve sound. On my blow-off valve kit, I spent $40 on eBay. That is a knockoff HKS valve, but I haven't had any problems with it. It holds boost, it sounds good, and it does the job. If you want to go with a name brand blow-off valve, you could expect to probably spend between $150 and a couple $100. If you go knockoff, you could spend around $50 or less, and if you go with none, obviously that's free. And at this point, you're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of stuff. I wonder how much more stuff is left. And honestly, there's not that much more stuff left. That's most of what you need to set up your turbo. The last thing that you're going to need is a downpipe and an exhaust. On my car, I made that custom for a total of around $65 in materials. I welded up my exhaust out of mild steel, which is the absolute cheapest steel that you could get. It'll rust and it probably won't last super long, but it does do the trick. If you're getting a off-the-shelf downpipe, you could expect to spend normally a couple $100, sometimes more. And for a full exhaust system, once again, a couple $100, sometimes more. If you're doing it yourself, like I said, you could save tons of money, and that's what I did. For a total of about $65, I made a full exhaust system for my car. And that's really all the main components that you're going to need to turbo your car. There will be other little costs, like on my car, I bought some extra oil line fittings. I bought a boost controller that I didn't end up using because I'm going to go to electronic boost control, which if you're interested in, subscribe to the channel. I'll have videos on that down the line. I bought some other fittings here, like this idle air control valve, which sits right here. And that was just a fitting to connect the hose to this piping. And there's always going to be little costs that are going to vary from build to build. So I would budget around $100 for these extra costs. You probably won't spend that, but just know that there will be little extra things other than what I just talked about. Some other things to consider that fit in that category are like little hoses and clamps and things like this, little brass fittings and things like that, and really just all of the things that you'll need to button up and finish up your turbo build. And now to answer the question that we started this video with, how much does it cost to turbo my car? My car was done, as I said, a very DIY way. I did everything myself, which includes tuning, which you should budget a couple $100 to $1,000 for, depending on where you're going to get it tuned. But I did that all myself. And the total that I spent to turbo my car was $1,047. Yes, $1,047. That is all I spent to reliably turbo and tune this car. It did take a ton of research on my side, but if you're willing to put in the time to turbo your car, there's no reason you should be spending tons and tons and tons of money just to get the thing turboed. When I look on these forums and people are saying you need to spend $10,000 or $5,000 to turbo your car, they're really just flat out wrong, and it's because they don't want to put in their own effort to put together a kit. Now, if you don't have time or you don't want to put in the time to learn about how to turbo a car, then the kits start to become worth it. But now I know how to turbo cars. I did all the research and I had a ton of fun with it, and in the future, building and turboing a car would take a lot less time. So really, if you're interested in this hobby, which I'm sure you are if you're watching this video, and you want to put in the time, you could save yourself a ton of money turboing a car. Other things to think about is start with a car with a robust drivetrain. My car is a 1.6 car, which I honestly shouldn't have started with, which means that I could really only run about 150 horsepower until I upgrade this drivetrain. Right now I'm already making more than that, and the clutch isn't happy with me, and the diff is probably about to blow, so I do have to put more money in there. Keep that in mind when you're turboing your car, that there might be other associated costs like that, but you could turbo a car way cheaper than most people are saying on the internet. And getting back to that, if I bought everything used, I could have got this job done for under $700. Now this does include selling my stock injectors, my stock ECU, and my stock AFM, which is an airflow meter that is stock on Miatas here. So that did make me some money back. If I didn't sell off that stuff, I would be right around $850 or so if I bought used, or right around that $1,200 if I didn't sell off my old parts. If you're going for a bad approach without engine management and you're just sort of tricking the ECU, you could get a car turboed for right around $425 or even less than that if you're buying junkyard parts. Now people do that and some of them have good luck. A lot of people do it on beaters just to have fun with the build, and there's a lot of merit to doing that to have a really good time, but that's the sort of build that's more unlikely to last a long time compared to doing something like this with full standalone engine management, where the car is fully under your control and you can make sure that it handles boost the right way. Once again, $1,047 is what I paid to turbo my car. If you're interested in starting where I started here with this build, I have everything linked down in the description below. It'll take you right to the pages where you could buy all the components that I used on this car. If you see people saying, oh, you need to spend $10,000 to turbo your car, link them this video because you really don't, and this will be pretty reliable. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something, subscribe for more, leave any questions or comments that you have down below, and I hope you stick around for the next one. Take care.